I never believed in destiny. I was the kind of person who trusted schedules, rules, and routines. Everything in my life had to make sense, or at least look like it did. At the time, I worked as a flight attendant. Long hours, short nights, smiles that had nothing to do with how I actually felt. People think that job is glamorous. Travel, hotels, different cities. But most days, it's just exhaustion in a neat uniform. That flight was supposed to be like any other. A routine route. Familiar faces, nothing special. I didn't know it would divide my life into before and after. I was 27 years old, and I was drowning, not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. I had student loans I barely talked about, credit card debt that kept growing no matter how hard I worked, and a constant pressure in my chest that never fully went away. From the outside, I looked fine, independent, responsible, stable. Inside, I was terrified of the future. That morning, I stood in the airport bathroom, staring at my reflection. Perfect makeup, hair neatly tied back, and eyes that looked tired. I remember thinking, I can't keep doing this forever. But I walked out anyway. Because that's what you do when you don't know how to stop. The flight was half full, business travelers, a few families, people already lost in their own worlds. That's when I noticed him. He wasn't loud. Not at first. He sat alone by the window, a few rows from the back, well-dressed, clean, but something about him felt off. His shoulders were tense. His jaw clenched like he was holding something in. When I passed by during boarding, our eyes met for just a second, and I looked away quickly. There was a sadness there, not the kind that asks for attention, the kind that wants to disappear. The flight took off smoothly. The seatbelt sign went off, and I started my usual service routine. When I reached his row, he looked up at me. "Can I get a drink?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I served him one, standard procedure. 10 minutes later, he pressed the call button again. "Another one, please." I hesitated. Company rules are clear about alcohol, especially during daytime flights. I looked at him more closely this time. His hands were shaking slightly. I brought him water instead and said gently, "Let's take it slow, okay?" He didn't argue. He just nodded. That worried me more than if he had. Later, as I walked past again, I noticed the empty look in his eyes. Like he wasn't really there. I stopped. I don't know why I did that. Flight attendants are trained to keep distance, but something in me recognized that look. I leaned in slightly and asked quietly, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. Then he laughed, a short, hollow laugh. "No," he said, "not even close." I should have walked away. Instead, I stood there. He told me he was supposed to be somewhere important, a meeting that could have saved his company or ended it. It didn't matter anymore. He said he had built a business from nothing, worked every day for years, missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed life. And then, slowly, it all collapsed. Bad decisions, trusting the wrong people, one problem turning into 10. He was bankrupt, not just financially, emotionally. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "My company, my reputation, most of my friends." He looked at the floor. "I don't know who I am without it." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only honest response. The rest of the flight passed strangely fast. I checked on him a few more times. Always water. Always calm. When we started our descent, he looked up at me again. "You probably think I'm pathetic," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I think you're human." He smiled. For the first time, it reached his eyes. As passengers stood up and gathered their bags, he waited until everyone else was gone. Then he looked at me and said something that still echoes in my mind. "If you hadn't talked to me today, I don't know if I'd still be here tomorrow." My heart stopped. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. After the plane landed, I stood frozen in the aisle for a moment. Those words kept repeating in my head. "If you hadn't talked to me today, I don't know if I'd still be here tomorrow." I watched him walk away through the jet bridge. Just another passenger, just another face in the crowd. But something inside me refused to let it go. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. The silence felt too loud. I kept imagining different endings. What if he was serious? What if that flight had been his last stop? I had never been trained for that. No emergency manual covers moments like that. The next morning, I checked my phone more times than I could count, even though I knew there would be nothing there. And there wasn't. A week passed, then another. Life went on the way it always does. Flights, airports, smiles, goodbyes, until one afternoon during a layover in Chicago, I saw a familiar name pop up on my phone, a message request. I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it. It was him. He said he had found me through the airline's social media page, scrolled for hours, hoped I would answer. I didn't know who else to talk to, the message read, but I'm still here and I think you should know that. I felt my chest tighten. We started talking. At first, just small messages, nothing heavy. Then, slowly, the truth came out. He told me about the nights he couldn't sleep, the panic attacks that came out of nowhere, the shame of going from success to nothing. He admitted that on the plane, he had already made a plan, not a dramatic one, just a quiet decision. I didn't ask for details. Some things don't need to be said out loud. I told him about myself, too, about the debt, the pressure, the constant fear of falling behind, about how tired I was of pretending everything was fine. It surprised me how easy it was to be honest with him. We were strangers, and yet somehow safer than people who had known us for years. Weeks turned into months. We talked almost every day, not always about deep things, sometimes just about random moments. A bad cup of coffee, a delayed flight, a memory from childhood. But beneath all of it, there was something else, a quiet understanding. He started therapy, not because I pushed him, but because he finally believed his life still mattered. I started budgeting, facing my numbers, making hard choices I had been avoiding. We weren't fixing each other. We were just not letting each other fall. Then one day, he told me he was coming to my city. Not for me. At least that's what he said. He had an interview, a chance to work for someone else, for the first time in years. I remember standing at the cafe where we agreed to meet. My hands were shaking. I had seen him once before, on a plane, at his lowest. This was different. When he walked in, I barely recognized him, not because he looked richer or more confident, but because he looked present. He smiled when he saw me, a real smile. We talked for hours, no expectations, no promises, just two people sharing a table and a moment. At one point, he looked at me and said, "I don't know where this is going, but I know I don't want to disappear anymore." I felt tears burn behind my eyes, because I realized something then. Neither did I. After that flight, I couldn't sleep for days. I would lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying his face in my head. Not drunk, not rude, just empty. The kind of emptiness you see in people who are still alive but already tired of being here. I told myself I'd never see him again. In my job, people come and go. Most stories stay somewhere between takeoff and landing. But 3 days later, his name appeared on the passenger list again. Same route, same seat. When I looked up, he was already watching me. This time he was sober, calm, but the exhaustion was still there, deeper than before. "Hi," he said quietly. "I'm glad it's you again." I nodded and walked down the aisle, pretending everything was normal. But something inside me tightened. Why him again? Coincidence? Or was life pushing me toward something I wasn't ready for? Later, once we were in the air, he spoke again. "I'm sorry about last time. I wasn't myself." "It's okay," I said. "No, it wasn't. I've been lost for a long time." Those words stayed with me. We talked in short moments between my duties, between steps down the aisle, between glances. And the longer the flight went on, the clearer it became. He wasn't flirting. He was looking for someone who still felt real. At one point he asked, "Do you ever feel like life is moving forward and you're just watching it happen?" I wanted to joke it off, but I couldn't because I felt the same way. I told him about myself, about the debts, the constant fear of not being enough, about how the smile I wear at work isn't happiness, it's part of the uniform. He listened, really listened. Then he said, "I used to be different. I had a business, money, plans. And now I have nothing. I lost everything, including myself." His voice didn't shake, and somehow that scared me more than tears. "There were days," he said, "when I didn't want to wake up at all." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't know the right words, so I just said, "But you're still here. That has to mean something." He looked at me like those words were the only thing holding him together. Before landing, he handed me a worn-out business card. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "not as a passenger and a flight attendant, just as people." After the flight, I stood there for a long time, holding that card in my hand. And for the first time in years, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't take this step, I'd choose loneliness again. So I texted him first. And that message changed both of our lives. We met a week later. No uniforms, no airplane noise, no forced smiles. Just two strangers sitting across from each other in a small cafe that smelled like coffee and rain. He looked different on the ground, smaller somehow, like the sky was the only place where he could still breathe. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "Why?" I asked. "Because if I came, it would mean I'm still trying." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. We talked for hours. Not about dreams, not about the future, about failure, about shame, about how heavy mornings can feel when you don't see a reason to get out of bed. He told me the truth. The business he built for years collapsed. Partners disappeared. Friends stopped answering calls. "I went from being needed to being invisible," he said. I watched his hands as he spoke. They were steady, too steady. That's when I understood something. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't asking for pity. He had already accepted the idea that his life might be over. "I'm not suicidal," he said quietly, "but I don't feel alive either." Silence sat between us. I wanted to fix it, say something smart, something hopeful. But instead I said the only honest thing I could. "I see you." He looked up so fast it almost scared me. "You do?" "Yes," I said, "and you're not invisible here." His eyes filled with tears, not falling, just standing there waiting. That was the moment. The moment I realized he wasn't just opening up, he was holding on. To me. After that day, he started texting more, asking how my shifts went, sending random thoughts at 3 a.m. At first, it felt sweet. Then it felt heavy. If I didn't reply fast enough, he'd apologize. If I sounded tired, he'd ask if he did something wrong. And one night, he said something that kept me awake until morning. "I don't know where I'd be right now if I hadn't met you." My chest tightened, because that wasn't romance, that was dependence. And suddenly I wasn't just a woman he liked. I was the reason he stayed. Weeks passed, and the connection between us grew heavier, deeper, more real. Not just messages or fleeting moments on flights anymore, real conversations, real vulnerability. One evening, I found myself pacing my tiny apartment, staring at my phone. He had texted again. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about everything I lost, and I keep thinking maybe it wasn't supposed to be this way." I froze. Those words felt like a hand tightening around my chest. I realized something terrifying. He was relying on me to hold him together, and somehow I was letting him. I took a deep breath and typed back slowly. "You're not alone. You're not invisible. You're still here." Minutes later, he called, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I wanted to tell him I wasn't a savior. I wanted to tell him I had my own cracks, my own fears, my own nights where I wanted to disappear. But I didn't, because I saw the same desperation in him that I had felt in myself. And for the first time in years, I wanted to be needed too. He came to visit a few days later. We met at the small park near my apartment, trees rustling, early autumn leaves drifting down. I could see it in his eyes, the exhaustion, the fear, the tiny flicker of hope. "I'm still scared," he admitted. "I'm scared I'll fall again, that I'll ruin everything, that I'll drag you down with me." I shook my head. "You can't ruin me," I said. "You just need to try, that's all." We sat on the bench, watching the wind toss leaves around us. He didn't reach for my hand immediately. He hesitated. The weight of his past, the ghost of all he'd lost, held him back. Finally, slowly, he touched my hand. And that touch, tentative, fragile, was enough to make me realize something crucial. Love isn't perfect. Love isn't calm or easy. Love sometimes arrives in broken, desperate pieces. And sometimes, it's the only thing that keeps you from disappearing entirely. That night, I watched him leave, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I felt possibility. Not guaranteed happiness. Not fairy tale endings. Just a chance. And that was enough. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't to save someone else. It's to let yourself be saved, too. Over the next weeks, our bond deepened in ways neither of us expected. We met not just as strangers, not just as confidants. but as people leaning on each other to survive. He shared more about the collapse of his business, the betrayals, the sudden loss, the nights he couldn't see any way forward. I shared my own struggles, the debt, the suffocating pressure, the fear that I would never get ahead. We didn't fix each other overnight. There were nights filled with silence, moments when he stared at the floor, and I didn't know if he was listening to me or just slipping into old shadows. But there were also nights of laughter, unexpected light, tiny victories, a cleared debt, a successful small project he worked on, a shared joke that made the heaviness lift, if only for a moment. One day, he looked at me and said, "I'm scared of failing again, scared that I'll fall and you'll leave." I shook my head. "You won't fall alone, and I'm not leaving." It wasn't a promise of perfection. It wasn't a vow that everything would be easy. It was a truth. Someone finally saw him, really saw him, and decided to stay. We began planning a small project together. Nothing big at first, just something to rebuild trust, confidence, and momentum. Each day, step by step, we started to climb out of the darkness that had defined both our lives. And with each step, something shifted inside me too. I realized I wasn't just helping him survive. I was living again, feeling again, hoping again. It was terrifying, because being needed, being seen, meant being vulnerable. And I had spent so long hiding, but I couldn't hide from him. And slowly, I didn't want to. The turning point came one rainy evening. We were at a cafe, planning the next phase of our small business idea. He had been unusually quiet, staring out the window. "I almost gave up," he said. "On life, on everything, on me." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't," I said softly. "You're still here, and that counts for everything." For the first time, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be. Confident, alive, full of drive. And not because he had recovered what he lost, but because he realized he didn't have to do it alone anymore. We left that cafe holding hands. Not lovers yet, not perfect, but two people who refused to let the world break them completely. And in that moment, I understood. Survival wasn't just about money or status or even success. It was about connection, about trust, about love in its rawest, most human form. Months passed, and slowly, the world began to feel lighter for both of us. We were no longer strangers haunted by our pasts. We were partners in rebuilding life from the ruins. His small projects started to grow. Every success, no matter how minor, was a victory against everything he had lost. And I celebrated each one like it was my own. Our bond deepened with every shared challenge. Late nights spent planning, early mornings supporting each other. Every setback became a lesson. Every small triumph, a reason to keep going. One evening, sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights shimmer in the rain, he turned to me and said, "I never thought I could feel alive again, but you showed me it's possible." I smiled, feeling tears prick my eyes. "You did this yourself," I told him. "I just helped you see it." We laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from relief, from surviving, from knowing that the worst is behind you. We started dreaming bigger. Opening a small business together, something we could both pour our hearts into. Not just for money, but to create something lasting, something meaningful. And love grew quietly in between the chaos. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Real, grounded, human. One day he looked at me and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." And I realized that I felt the same. I wanted him. Not as a savior, not as a project. I wanted him as a partner, as someone who had walked through darkness and come out stronger. The day came when we officially launched our small venture. Standing side by side, watching it take its first real steps into the world, we felt pride, fear, and hope all at once. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be perfect, but it was ours. And in that moment, I understood the truth. Life doesn't hand out fairy tales. It hands out struggles, hardships, and broken pieces. And sometimes, just sometimes, it lets you find someone to hold those pieces with. Years later, we still remember that first flight. That day that seemed ordinary but changed everything. We smile about it, about how fragile and broken we were. And yet, somehow, how resilient we became. Because we learned something simple, yet profound. Even in the darkest moments, hope can appear in the form of another human being. And when you let yourself be seen, let yourself be helped, let yourself be loved, That's when life truly begins.